Welcome back to the XT podcast, where we decode experience transformations that drive business growth. I'm your host, Ashutosh Karandikar. Today's guest brings a rare and powerful dual lens to the CX world, one that blends brand strategy with clinical psychology. Aileen Day is the founder of Aileen Day Advisory and has spent over 20 years transforming some of Australia's most trusted brands into human centered growth engines. But here's what sets Eileen apart. She's not just a seasoned CX advisor, she's also a practicing clinical psychotherapist. And that means she doesn't just talk about customer and employee experience from the surface, she goes deep into what it actually means to be heard, understood, and valued. In this conversation, we unpack why Eileen believes clinical empathy should be a boardroom metric, how organizations can stop chasing scores and start creating meaningful emotional value for their people and customers. What she means by the casual hookup between customer, employee, and the human experience, a core theme in her upcoming book, The Joy of CEHX, launching this October on International CX Day, and why operationalizing human centricity isn't just about care, it's about courage, accountability, and commercial impact. So, whether you're leading CX, culture, HR, or business growth, this episode is going to make you rethink what it really means to design for humans. Let's dive into this powerful, real, and unfiltered episode with Eileen Day. Hi, Eileen. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Really appreciate this. In fact, of all the episodes that I've done so far, Eileen, this was one of the episodes where I felt challenged in terms of coming up with the questions, primarily because of the profile you have. I mean, you have worn so many hats at once. You are a CX leader, an author with an upcoming book. I'm very curious and interested to know what's it all about. I'll ask a few questions around that as well. You're a psychotherapist
I am.
yourself, and with so many hats being worn at once, what's that one common thread that binds it all together in terms of your focus on CX?
Can I just say, when I got your questions, I was so impressed with how thoughtful they were. So thank you.
Thank you.
And there are a few different hats, and ultimately each hat has come from a CX need, and being a clinical psychotherapist has come from a piece of work that I do where I do group consulting, group coaching for a number of small business owners. And in that group coaching landscape, consistently we were getting to the point where I would challenge each member to stretch themselves and to show up in different ways, to push through some of the boundaries they may have been setting for themselves. And consistently, I kept finding that we kind of get to this point where we just couldn't go any further. They would, hit the metaphorical glass ceiling. And if anything, in some of the situations, we were going backwards. And there was some really clear evidence of self-sabotage, of limiting beliefs. And I've been around the traps. I'm talking about how old we are. I'm 45, so I've been there and I've done a few things in my life. And having some of those life experiences helped in some senses where I could partake in providing some, advice. But it was sometimes getting to the point where I wasn't sure that I had the qualifications to step out of that just life experience advice and delve further into that well-being and mental health advice. And so I had the opportunity to go and get the qualifications that I needed to become a registered and licensed clinical psychotherapist. And so it's a little bit like counseling, but it's a lot more engaging, a lot more active. It's not just talking. We have a number of treatments that can help in different areas of people's lives, whether it's the way they see themselves or how they show up as a leader, how they integrate or interact with people from different and diverse cultures and experiences, how they show up for themselves, their family. And I talk about having a value-driven brand as a business owner. And so what this really started helping me do was help my clients also have a value-driven life. And so taking the things that we were learning around how to create a brand such as open communication or candid communication, or personally affirming beliefs, or setting boundaries, and just things that really create a imperative customer and employee experience. And as we talk about a human experience, and applying those clinical kind of treatments to amplify the success in not just the people and their brand, but the people and their personal lives as well. Having that, all important human experience.
How beautiful, and what a worthy cause to dedicate one's time and life to, Irene. So kudos to you for doing this.
Thank
Um,
you.
and also I wonder, Eileen, as a consultant and as you grow up the ladder, you realize that you've been told that there are methodologies and frameworks and processes to drive impact, growth, sales, marketing, branding, positioning, and it often makes you feel that you are stuck in a mechanical rut of an
Yeah.
input output system, that if you input something and follow a process, there'll be a specific outcome that you can chase, and it
Mm.
often completely ignores the whole pivot around the instincts, the vision, the values that actually initiate the ideas and move the companies, the people. And it seems that this whole human experience layer, as you called out in your answer too, is completely ignored when it is the power behind the engine.
Mm.
And you advocate that so actively in terms of the term that you've come up with as well, CEHX. And you mentioned that it's not metrics but the meaning that drives impact, and how human experience is so important. What is it that the leaders today miss out on, in terms of understanding this the right way and leveraging it the right way for the right impact?
From what I see, there's a definite move towards removing friction in a customer's experience, right? So we want to try and make things, and even an employee's experience. So we want to
Sure.
try and make things move faster, stronger, more efficient, less button touches. But the reality of that is that we yet quite comprehending what that really, really means and should look like. How do we design that for a desirable output? And so a lot of the time, what we go into, product creation or service design thinking is, how can we get the best ROI, return on
Right.
investment
Yes.
for this work that we're about to apply, right? So let's take, for example, one of the most common and easy additions to a business at the moment is everybody adding chatbots to their websites, right? Easy, low kind of hanging fruit when it comes to improving your customer experience. But what if that customer experience was actually detrimentally affected because you didn't design that chatbot with the right predictors in mind, right? So you didn't consider things like the systems that you are going to impact when you create this chatbot. In your mind, as a business, you've potentially, and I say this potentially, it's consistently found that you find an affordable chatbot and you give it some very basic training, depending on your budget, if you give it any training whatsoever, and you implement it, you get your IT team to implement it, and then you walk away and you go, job done. But then what you find is that chatbot sends your customers into circles because it doesn't have the right intelligence. It hasn't been built with the right purpose in mind. It hasn't been trained to provide value to your customer. What it was delivered was to ultimately reduce, say, for example, the need for 3 people in the contact center,
Right.
right? So where people are like, AI is taking my jobs. Well, sometimes, yes, they are. But the reality is that very quickly, organizations are finding that the slap in the face they get from their customers, which is like, what are you thinking? I just want to give you my money and you're making it so hard, or you're making this experience unusable and unfriendly and full of friction because you didn't consider the whole value set of designing this piece of work. So, and I use chatbots just as a very simple, like I said, low
Sure.
hanging fruit, because they're easy to pick on, because too often we do them badly. Too often we expect that a chatbot should be the same quality as a, well-trained, loyal employee who sits in a contact center ready to support you and probably quite knowledgeable in multiple areas of the business. But they're not. And they're not trained that way. They're not built that way. They're not designed that way. And so often you find that that piece of work has actually negatively impacted not just the customer experience, but now the employee experience. Because now
True.
what's going to happen is your customer, if they are endeavoring to get this far, are going to find another way to get in touch with you. And now the
True.
poor employee on the other end of the phone potentially is going to cop a negative attitude for something that they have zero control over. And the brand trust is completely damaged, all because we didn't design our products and services with the human experience and what they value and what their needs are, what are the jobs they have to be done in mind. We literally designed it to give us the quickest bang for buck. To the hell with everything else.
So well said. So well said. And it is such a conundrum, Eileen, because businesses want to balance the two, what the customers and the employees need, and what is it that we can provide
Mm.
economically, efficiently, effectively. And they pretty much want to operate at the intersection always. So while there is this value set which is central to a positive impact, as you rightly called out, what would be the contributors to this value set? Would it be the purpose, brand promise, customer personas and expectations? What all things can we focus on to define this value set efficiently and ensure that what we can do, what we can deliver, and what is needed can be matched effectively and efficiently? What defines this value set?
I think, yeah, customer personas are a big thing. A lot of people don't bother with them, but I really do see the organizations that commonly understand that they are working with humans. And,
Hmm.
I say in my book, humans are fickle. They're subjective, they're unique, but also they're very much the same. They're all about what's in it for me. And I think ultimately the organizations that stop and take a moment to comprehend strategically who are we working for, right? What is this really going to do? What are the consequences? We talked about output in, output out, and
Yes.
I very bluntly call it shit in, shit out. It's basically like if you don't put the quality, design, and thought process into what you're going to create, then you can expect that same level of quality, if not worse, as an output, as an outcome. So it's not to say that everything needs to be over engineered to a breath of its life, but it is to say that you need to be purposeful and considered in what you are creating and why you're creating it. Like,
Right.
who's this going to serve? How long is it going to be purposeful for? A lot of the times businesses have more than one type of customer segment, right?
Of
So let's take a sports shop, for example. They will have multiple segments of customers. If they were to introduce a product range without really comprehending which segment of their market they're targeting, then imagine the likelihood of that all just falling flat, right? A perfect example, I'm not sure if you have Aldi is a supermarket
Yep.
chain that is based from Germany, but we have multiple locations here in Australia. An example of probably not really understanding what's going on in the landscape, who you're targeting is Aldi, for example, have every winter here in Victoria, they release a snow season range of clothing,
Sure.
boots, jackets, thermal, everything, right? Anything you could need to wear when you go to the snow. However, like much of the world, Australia is in, economic hard times.
Sure.
Everyone's feeling the pinch. And they have found that for the first year in years, and probably ever since having this snow season launch, that it's fallen flat on its face.
Right.
And so what that means is that had they perhaps kind of read the room and gone, hey, our personas have changed. our personas' lives have changed, I should say.
Right.
Who we would normally target, they don't currently have the spare income for visiting the snow this year. So maybe we need to reduce our snow range and think of another type of range that we could design for people who may want to go to the snow but can't financially, afford it this year. What else could we deliver for those customer segments that would still equally give us a return on investment instead of still going hard and really hard on their normal range that they would deliver at this time of year? And so, yeah, customer personas aren't a set and forget. Designing that customer experience and really taking into consideration the environment around you, the economic landscape, the politics, the trends, all of that stuff can't be forgotten. And they are to consistently just, we did it once. That's all it needs to be done. It's not it's not strategic. That's not agile, as I would also, talk to my clients. We're not being agile. We're being very rigid in what we think wins because it worked once. So it must work every time.
Of course. What you mentioned is so commonsensically simple, but I don't see it on the ground being implemented. I mean, as humans, all of us are not the functions of our demographic attributes. And woman, salary, income, these are the demographies in which we define personas. But clearly, you're talking about the social environment we belong to, the triggers and the motivations, the influences that define our decisions and choices. So it's more behavioral how you're
Mm,
defining it, and not demographic in terms of personas as well, and the actions you're defining by way of mindset. I'm curious, Eileen,
yeah.
can you take us through an example where, led a business transformation that drove an impact because of this mindset shift towards using behavioral personas, understanding contexts, and then given all of that, what is it that they did, not did, because of which an impact finally came? An example would be great for us to clearly concretize this understanding.
Yeah, if I think about, one of my clients had, a huge mindset shift when we were talking about errors being made in their organization. And
Right.
their business suffered quite dramatically from silos. So, for those listening who might not know what a silo is, it's basically departments within the organization who have really no comprehension of what the department, on either side of them has to do with the customer or even their own employee experience. And, it's the left hand not really knowing what the right hand
Sure.
does and vice versa. And it was a largely male orientated organization. And there was a lot of shame around discussing things that weren't working well. And I should mention they're in the building industry. Impacts to errors in the building industry can be hugely,
Sure.
hugely like devastating to the organization. They can
Of course.
cost, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And this organization had a real adversity to speaking up when things weren't going right. They were very good at kicking the can and getting angry and swearing their hearts out on site. But when it came to sitting down and actually confessing to what is not working, people were not doing that. And so we had to do some real hard work around why is there so much shame around what's going wrong? Why can't we speak up in a timely manner? Why can't we be open and honest with each other? What are we scared of? And so there came to be that there were these pieces around previous experiences in previous workplaces. Never underestimate the impact, negative or positive, a previous employer can have on your team, and the assumptions that they can carry from that experience into your business. And if you don't ask those questions quite openly and providing space, what we call psychological safety,
Sure.
which you can imagine when you talk about psychological safety to a bunch of builders, they laugh at you. They're like, come off it. But the reality is that they are, like everybody else, simply human, and they actually do. They do want psychological safety. They just don't know how to embrace it. They don't know how to show it. They don't know how to ask for it. And so they have this expectation as a culture, as that type of industry, that if they say that something is going wrong, that they will be judged harshly. They will be
Right.
critiqued as bad at their job, and they don't want that. Obviously, they're quite proud, quite, job pride. And so when things don't work out, they take it quite personally and they expect others to judge them as harshly as they're possibly judging themselves.
Sure.
But the problem with that was that it was continuing to show the same problems coming up job after job after job. And so what
Right.
I started to do was do some really deep observation and just standing back, and the team knew I was there. But just watching how they interact with each other, how the team members from each department interacted with each other, and what that culture looked like. And ultimately, we started to create space where we were saying to the team leaders, we want you to tell us, like, without any fluff, what's going on, like, where are we at? What are the problems? How can we resolve them for you? Do you need us to listen? Do you need us to fix? Right? And what started to happen bit by bit was that the team leaders started to recognize that they could tell their boss, their directors, what was really going on.
Wow.
And the directors were a little bit hot headed as well, but they too had to learn to take a deep breath, absorb the information, and what we would call respond versus react,
Right.
right? So what they were doing very, very often was they were reacting, right? Blowing up, sending mean emails. And it was no wonder that nobody wanted to tell anybody what was going on, because there was evidence that when you told the truth, it didn't work out well for you.
Right.
So we really had to show these team leads, hey, we're ready to change. We need to know what's really going on, and we really need to know in a candid manner. Candid being upfront, honest, timely, not rude, but not beating around the bush either, right? Some people, when they're not used to candid communication, can feel like it's quite aggressive. But I would say it's people learning to be assertive. And that
Sure.
assertiveness and that openness and that willingness to be vulnerable absolutely shifted that whole organization to start having really, really open feedback with each other in a timely manner that meant that they started saving thousands of dollars in every job they did,
Wow.
because they were picking up errors quicker, because people weren't sitting on them trying to hide them, trying to fix them, making them worse. Customer satisfaction started going through the roof. They increased their referrals, right? Every company's dream. Word of mouth, improved word of mouth. The quality of the workmanship and the turnover of tradespeople. So the quality of the workmanship went up. The tradespeople stayed around longer. So their trades churn went down, which in a building industry that is suffering from a massive lack of trade people, quality
Wow.
tradespeople,
Sure.
is a huge win, right?
Yes.
All because they started to change their mindset around what it means to provide psychological safety, and how that just simply impacts not just the employee's mental state, because no longer are they sitting with shame and in humiliation and embarrassment. No longer are they scared to talk to the people in the other departments who can
Right.
help them, right? So we're reducing silos, we're increasing team culture, improving team cultures, all because we started to see this shift around transparent and open communication that removes the shame and the judgment, and the improvement to the customer, the employee, and the human experience. And, I talk about the joy of sex, so the CEHX, and how that feels, right? How that feels. And I say it feels effervescent. And it really is when you have such a shift, like your head tingles, right? That's what starts to happen is You're releasing stress from your body. Your mind feels calmer. You're more able to respond versus constantly stressed out, pissed off, and reacting, ready for that fight and flight versus, the calm response, just taking things as they come, solving problems as they're needed. So instead of this dumpster fire kind of feeling, you start getting this like calm waters, all because of a shift in mindset.
What a beautiful analogy, Eileen. Calm waters. And it must have been a joy to see that impact of all the mindset shift work that you did. And this is where I have to bring your book, The Joy of CEHX. You called it out in your answer as well. And it's such an evocative title, Eileen, firstly. Hey, I can see the book as well now. That's fantastic. When is it going to be published and when would people be able to access it and read it? What's the date, Eileen?
So it comes out. The book physically is available online and in retail outlets on the 7th of October,
Great.
2025. So International CX Day, and
Nice.
it's available on Kindle the week before that. So everyone that reads it on Kindle and leaves a sexy review, they then help me get up to bestseller, Amazon
Wow.
bestseller by the time
Cool.
that it actually launches in bookstores. So that's my aim, is to hit the bestseller list within the first week of it launching.
How wonderful. Well, all the best for that, and really looking forward to the book getting published and getting my first kind of access to the book so that I can read it at length. But the joy, the word itself is such a curious word to use in this context. And you refer to psychological safety as one of the dimensions of things that drive that joy in workplace. But very curious to know what does joy look like in practice, what other dimensions exist, and what does it mean for employees, customers, and leaders when it comes to feeling this joy as they interact and engage with each other.
Yeah, so we talk about joy, and it elicits, different emotions in different people, but in the realms where I have seen the joy of customer and employee and human experience co-created and coexisting, where
Sure.
it is, one pillar is as important as the other. It legitimately has revealed itself to be where team members, for example, wake up joyful to go to work. They're no longer struggling with just the survival of life. They actually have this intrinsic heart, feeling of heartiness when they go to work. They feel like they have a sense of purpose. They feel like they are valued. For example, doing some work with a university over here in Victoria at the moment and talking to some of the professors. Absolutely, we're talking about implementing customer experience into university here in Australia. And,
Sure.
they talk about the importance of their roles and how they feel like they add value to the education system here in Australia, how they understand that their greater purpose is to form the next generation of entrepreneurs, right? Like that joy that they feel knowing that their employer provides them this space to be creative, to have autonomy, to work in different realms of, things that interest them, but also can create deeper investments for their employer as well, right? So there's this win-win. We talk about the fact that the joy of sex is in its rawest form. If you're doing sex right, you get this warmth over you. And when business and the pillars of customer and employee and human experience all come together, you get the same, like, yeah, it's working. Yes, we've got people who want to be here. Yes, I've got, people who want to spend their money with us. I've got people that trust us, that love us. I've got humans that care about us and would miss us if we weren't here. and I'm creating things that they desire and that they love and that they want more of. And like, what a feeling, right? Just that intrinsic joy of knowing that everything is coming together in the way that you should expect business to come together. I'm a firm believer that business shouldn't be hard, that it's our perhaps that, we don't know what we don't know. And
Sure.
when we do know, man, like so good.
Wow, what a passionate answer, Eileen. You clearly, anybody who listens to this would want to experience this. That's how good it was. I mean, one would want to experience this as an employee, as a customer of a brand, as a leader who wants to drive this joy for the customers and employees. So, more power to you for all the work that you
Yeah.
do, Eileen. And I can go on and on. I have lots of questions still pending, but I have to mark the episode with a specific slot. But I can't close in without asking you this
Not at
one
all.
last question, which is, any professional who hears you talk would want to connect with the people, with the human behind the employee, the customers and partners and so on, and drive that connection towards an impact, but they might feel a sense of disconnect or incapability of being able to understand the human. While they may be great at what they do, competent at the work that they drive, what is it that these professions can do who understand the importance of what you're saying, but don't find the means and approaches to be able to do that and feel the disconnect? What are the key things that you would recommend them to do in order to get there?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Look, not everybody is the extrovert that I am. Not everybody is, wanting to go out there and tap strangers on the shoulder and say, "Hey, what do you think about XYZ?" And absolutely, there are, I think about my husband, for example. My husband is a tattoo artist. He owns his own tattoo studio. If I told him to go out and, do half the things that I do, he would look at me like I was strange. He'd be like, that's not ever going to happen. He's a very introverted person when it comes to understanding how to tattoo, expert, subject matter expert. But all
Sure.
the rest of it, he probably would be like, no, that's not something I really feel comfortable doing. And so for him and people like him who still want to develop their business, still want to develop the people within their business, I would certainly say there is nothing wrong with quiet power, nothing wrong with observation. If anything, I know it's hard to probably consider, but observation is actually one of my most personal power moves. I love people watching. I love just checking why people might do what they're doing. I love going out into, different organizations and just sitting in the background quietly, which surprises some people that I'm capable of doing that. But it is an excellent opportunity just to watch human nature in its finest form. And so, what I would suggest for people listening, for example, find a business similar to yours, right? So you might perhaps run a cafe. Go and find another cafe that you admire, that you think treats their employees well, that you think has a really kind of good quality customer experience that you could aspire to, if not deliver better. And just
Sure.
sit back in the corner, order a coffee, watch what people do, how they move around, if they ask for a bathroom, and don't just do it once. Like, make it a little bit of a habit. Again, business isn't set and forget. Business changes, human needs change. And so just sit back and watch. And if you have trusted customers already, be vulnerable with them, because the best thing a customer loves is to know that they are valued, their insight and the way they want to be served by you is something that you value. And so having, you talked about demographics before, having insight into what your customers value is probably one of the best things you can do as a business owner. And understanding that comes from observation. You can observe people's values very quickly. Do they return a shopping cart if they don't have to? Do they say thank you to the waiter, right? Do they show integrity if somebody cuts in their line, right? Like, you can understand human values and then serve to those values in your own business. And even that small piece of work will put you ahead of nearly every single competitor that hasn't even thought about the customer, the employee, and the human experience, and how together those pillars hold your business up and turn you into what I call a value driven brand.
How beautiful. Well, Eileen, this I would be happy to admit is one of the most warm, passionate, and emphatic episode I've had so far. Your joy in what you do reflects in your words and expression. So more power to you for doing what you do, and wishing you all the success as well as all the best wishes for the book that's soon going to be published. Looking forward to get the first version as soon as it's published. And once again, thank you so much for joining me at the podcast and sharing your wisdom with us. Really appreciate this. Thank you.